I'm gonna say around like 2014, meth became like a much bigger thing in my area, or at least I became more aware of people doing a lot of crystal, and I got introduced to it, right? Again, not I made a conscious decision to continue to buy meth, but a buddy of mine, we used to give each other lines at work, right? And he asked me if I wanted a line one morning, and I said, yeah. We went in the bathroom, and we used to go like into the stalls next to each other, and we would like fold it up in a bill and pass it under the stall to each other. And he passed it to me, and I opened it, and it's just white powder, and I sniffed it, and I immediately knew that it wasn't cocaine, right? Mm-hmm. And I was upset with him, and I confronted him, and he was like, my fault, I thought you knew. And he was like, just watch. And I used to work 2 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., right? And I did that line at 3 a.m, and I didn't need to do another line the entire day.
This is Rock Bottom with Ryan. No sugarcoating, no filters. The pain, the chaos, the truth. No bullshit. Just recovery.
Hey everyone, just want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Sober Strong Apparel. Sober Strong Apparel isn't just lifestyle wear, it's battle gear. We got heavyweight tees, hoodies, and gear for ones who draw a hard line. So if you go to soberstrongapparel.com, use code ROCKBOTTOM, all one word, capital letters, rock bottom, for 15% off. Used to be 10%, now you get 15% off. So check it out. Quality of clothing is amazing. Definitely look into the Impact Sponsorship Program. It's amazing. 10% of all purchases go to treatment facilities. So it's going to a good cause. I love what this company represents. Check out soberstrongapparel.com. Use code ROCKBOTTOM. 15% off, y'all. Enjoy this episode. All right. Welcome to another episode of Rock Bottom with Ryan. I'm here with my guest today, Brez. Brez, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, really good to have you. As you know, this is a lot of our podcasts are recovery related, and we go into a little bit of your history involving addiction, and you talk about where you're at today in your recovery. But we'll start off with a few basic questions: where you're from, what your drug of choice was, and what your sober date is.
Yeah, so I'm from Delaware. I was born and raised in Delaware, still here. Drug of choice is a difficult question, right? I don't know that I had a choice or I had a preference, right? Definitely alcohol and marijuana were consistent from 13 until I got into recovery. And then I had periods of time where I would lean heavily on other substances as well. And that was mainly related to availability, things like that. So yeah, I've covered the spectrum and struggled with pretty much everything. My recovery date is February 26, 2021.
Awesome. Congratulations. All right. You're going on 5 years coming up.
Yeah, coming up real soon, God willing.
That's awesome. Congratulations. That's really cool. So let's go back a little bit and see kind of how other drugs got into the mix and all that. But let's start off with like, what was your childhood like, your family dynamic, all that stuff, and how did you get into using in the first place?
My family, there was a lot of trauma and chaos in my household growing up. My father was a severe alcoholic. There was a lot of physical, emotional abuse in the home. And then my father and mother ended up separating when I was around 13. And then, that's kind of when, even though my father was abusive, right, fear kind of kept us, I don't want to say in line, but I mean, we were controlled by fear, right? So once he was no longer in the home, I remember actually feeling free, right? Like it felt like a relief. And the drinking and smoking weed started almost immediately at that point.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. So you're how many siblings did you have, if you don't mind me asking?
I have a younger brother who was 3 years younger than me, and I have an older brother who was 5 years older than me.
Okay. And I know a lot of people say when they're talking about alcoholics in the household, it's not their story to share. But if you're able to kind of talk about like, were there instances of your dad's alcoholism where it was like, was it verbal and emotional abuse, or was it just him being, intoxicated a lot of the time, or what kind of things kind of wore on you?
Yeah, so it was very confusing as a child, right? You don't really understand. But my father was an executive chef, right? He would be gone out the house. He would get up and leave for work very early. So by the time he got up for school, he was gone already. But then he wouldn't come home until about 7, 8 o'clock at night. When he came home, he was already extremely intoxicated. We're talking late 80s, early 90s. So he was able to drink. He ran the kitchen, so he was able to drink all day at work. By the time he came home, he was a different person. And that's when a lot of the abuse happened. It was physical abuse. I would say was the standout part. But my father had this twisted distortion of what he called respect, right? And it was like everything was disrespectful to him. So it was a lot of fear-based kind of stuff. We were just scared to death. And then when you factor in the physical stuff, he was physically abusive to not only me and my younger brother, but also my mother. So,
Yeah.
a lot of chaos, police coming, that kind of stuff.
Was it, did you feel like he was ever selective on who he administered abuse on, or do you think or is he kind of equal to whoever was in his path?
Yeah. So my older brother, with him being 5 years older, he wasn't really in the home a lot. He did live with us, but he was kind of, he stayed out of the home. But there's also like a different dynamic there. So my older brother was not my father's child. He's technically my half brother, I guess you would say, right? So there was a different dynamic between him and my father. But between me, my younger brother, and my mother, it was all, pretty aggressive.
Yeah. Okay. That's definitely tough growing up. And, I wasn't really physically abused growing up, but I witnessed a lot of abuse between parents and stuff, my mom and her boyfriends, and a little bit with my, dad and stuff. Not really against me or anything like that, but just, yeah, it's not like obviously as a kids, we just don't really understand any of that. And it kind of already like makes us predestined for things like anxiety and depression. Do you feel like you had some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I still struggle occasionally with depression. I was dual diagnosed, so I have bipolar type 2. So I go through like extended periods of depression. It doesn't you know, type 1 bipolar is like more shorter periods more often. Mine comes around very rarely, but when it
Very
comes,
abruptly.
it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of hard to shake. But
Yeah.
definitely a part of my story.
Yeah. No, I can totally relate to that. I haven't talked about it much on the podcast, but yeah, I can kind of relate to a lot of that. So as you grew a little bit older, your parents got separated and around the same age as when you first started using or started
Yeah,
marijuana.
so yeah, I started drinking and smoking weed. It was, everybody was, I hate to say that, right? It's not that I want to pass off accountability, but we are a product of our environment, right? So, it's similar to the abuse, right? The abuse, I've had people ask me, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you, do this or that? And it's like, when you're a child, you think that's what everybody's going through, right? Like,
So
we
true.
didn't know. We don't report it to our friends and they tell us it doesn't happen to them. Like, we don't talk about it. And that's preached in the home. You don't talk about what goes on in the house.
Yeah. Don't ask, don't tell kind of concept.
Yeah. And so, you know, as far as like alcohol and marijuana, everybody was doing it. All of my family, my older brother was doing it, both of my parents. So it's almost like a feeling of like, I want to be an adult. That's how I knew how to act like an adult, is to do these things. So once he wasn't there, it was kind of like, well, now I could do this. And my mother wouldn't report back to him because she knew the consequences would be abuse.
Yeah.
Right. So we felt like we could get away with it. And that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah, you felt kind of safe now that he was gone, and you felt that freedom, and you're like, well, the consequences won't be there as much now. You're not scared of him because, it's kind of like growing up with dads like that. It's like you're living with a drill sergeant, you're just like paranoid about making, even just dropping something or messing up your room or something. So I
Very
totally get it
so.
when you just feel that freedom. I mean, I was kind of like that when my mom, I would say her household was a lot more laid back and just kind of like, she let me run free a little more than my dad did. So when I was at her house, that's when I would tend to go experiment with stuff and go hang out with friends. So, and you make a great point though that I haven't talked about enough. But yeah, when I'd go to other people's houses and stuff, I would get so many different examples of what households were like compared to mine, and I never really thought to talk about mine or whatever, but you'd just see like, sometimes there were single moms and sometimes there were single dads or families that just seemed really functional too. Like the household seemed healthy, and it always made me think, why is my house not like that sometimes? So I get it.
Yeah, that's I haven't thought about that, but I guess my thought would have been, well, when people come to my house, we seem more normal too, right? Because the mask come on when people come around, you
Yeah,
know?
that's true. That's true.
So I really believe that I thought everyone, um, and you could get into the different era, right? Like back then, hitting your children, not necessarily beating severely, but physical repercussions weren't abnormal.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was, it's strange to look back on, honestly.
And you're right. Those masks do come on because I remember just being at other people's houses and thinking everything was hunky dory, great marriage, they great kids. But then you find out like their parents get divorced. So, I mean, people have to put those masks on just to put off that impression that everything's perfect. But
Yeah.
I get it. But how did things progress into like, into high school and stuff? Were you making friends okay, hanging around with the good crowds, different crowds? How did you get into like drinking more often?
Um, you know, uh, it was a slow progression. It was pretty much every weekend, like from the jump. You know, once I started drinking at 13, it was pretty much like a weekend thing. Mm, there was um another incident that happened. I was 14 years old. It was, I think, the summer going into my freshman year. Granted, this is 1 year after my father had left the home. We get the news that my father had passed away. My father actually died of a heroin overdose. This was in 94. And when that happened,
Your father
abuse
did?
and yeah.
Wow, I'm sorry.
So when that happened, abuse aside, whatever, it was very traumatic. And I suffered a lot with that. I remember shutting down, distinctly remember shutting down. I had my friend group, which were mainly like the neighborhood kids, but we were into a lot of nonsense, just causing chaos in the neighborhood and tormenting the residents of the neighborhood and all of
Yeah.
that. But in school, I was very withdrawn. I wasn't really, speaking to a lot of like trying to make new friends. It was a tough time, man. But, the drinking lasted as like a weekend thing all the way through high school. Around, I would say, my end of 10th grade, maybe summer going into 11th, the drinking started to pick up a lot more. The weed smoking was a daily thing. And then it progressed from there to, I ended up dropping out in my senior year because I was just hanging out on the street all day, drinking and smoking. But, the harder drugs didn't come in until around 19 or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was when you lost your dad, if you don't mind me asking, was your relationship okay with him at the time to the point where when he passed, obviously it was tough. It's tough to lose a parent no matter what. But what was your like response besides why do you think you shut down so much? Because it happened so abruptly? I would assume.
Yeah, that was a big thing. So it was, it was almost like if someone had passed away in a car crash, right? Because my father wasn't a heroin addict. He just tried it that night. And my father was a big guy like me, and he just overdid it, right? I can relate to that, I always remember thinking like, well, if you do this amount, I need to do a little bit more 'cause I'm a bigger guy, So the trauma I think really came from like the unexpectedness of it.
Yeah, just sudden. I mean, one day he's there, the next day he's not. It's kind of my little sister passed of a fentanyl overdose, so it was just like I just talked to her 2 days ago, and then all of a sudden I'm never going to talk to her again. So it's pretty heartbreaking when you lose somebody that quickly and suddenly, with no mental preparation. So yeah. So how were your grades in high school? You dropped out in the senior year. Did you end up finishing later?
Yeah, I ended up going back. So I was supposed to graduate in 99. I dropped out. And then in 2003, I went back and got my diploma through an adult high school. So my grades were not great, man, because, going into high school, I went in there with that going on. And I just wasn't trying, The schoolwork wasn't difficult for me. It was just, I didn't want to be there. And, it's crazy. I dropped out in my senior year because, I had broken my leg this summer, the same summer my father passed. Right. And, I had a cast all the way up to my thigh going into my freshman year. So I couldn't take gym in my freshman year. And then my sophomore year, I had to take gym 1. We had to complete gym 1 and gym 2 at some point throughout our high school. So my sophomore year, I'm supposed to take gym 1 with all the freshmen, and I thought I was grown, right? So it's like, I'm not going in there with them freshmen. So I just never
Yeah.
went.
Yeah.
And then that went to my junior year. So now it's my senior year and I just need a couple credits and 2 of them are gym class, which is going to be like all freshmen, right?
Jeez, yeah.
So I just wasn't willing to do it.
Yeah. No, I get it. So yeah, and at that point you're like grown man, and then they're like basically children coming in from middle school. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's funny how when you look back, like 2-3 years makes all the difference when you're a child.
I
You know,
know it does. It does.
now
I remember
I have good friends that are 10 years younger than me and we feel the same age.
exactly. When you're a kid, I remember being a freshman in high school and looking at seniors. I was like, I'm never gonna look that old. I'm always gonna be tiny. And yeah, next thing you know, here I am at 38, and I got friends in their 50s, 60s, 70s. So it makes no difference. So what happened? So what kind of like work did you get into after high school and in your 20s and stuff?
I started working as soon as I could. I when I was in a what they called summer youth back then, which was like the school would like hire you with working papers to like clean the school during the summer and stuff. I started doing that, and then after I was old enough to get a real job at 16, I started working fast food. I worked at like McDonald's and Wendy's, and I've always kept a job. I worked at Wendy's until I was 18. And then when I was 18, I was old enough to get a job at a vinyl window factory where I worked on an assembly line.
They
I worked
usually have
there.
benefits and stuff at places like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, a lot
Yeah,
better job than fast food. Paid
yeah,
a lot more back then.
yeah.
I think I was getting paid $9.88 an hour, and I was extremely happy with that.
I remember those days. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then I worked there until I got another job, um, where I was driving a 29-foot box truck. We were kind of subcontracted for Mattress Giant. So we were covering a few states where we would just deliver mattresses. And then I started working at a warehouse. And then I worked at that warehouse for 20 years until I got into recovery. And that's when I kind of left to get into the field I'm in now, kind of live in my purpose.
Okay. So for those 20 years, what were some of the primary things that were affecting you addiction wise? Like, was it alcohol? Was it hard drugs? What happened with that?
Yeah. So let's see, I started the warehouse in 2002. But I remember when I was 19, tried cocaine for the first time. And from that point forward, cocaine was kind of like a party type thing. Like we're going to the club or we're going to the bar. We would get, a bag or whatever. And then ecstasy was like a big thing in like 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
So that I tried that, and that was probably the first drug besides drug and alcohol. I mean, besides weed and alcohol that I was trying to do like as often as I could, but because of the way that drug works, like you can't do it every single day because you like won't feel the effects of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we would do it and then we would wait a couple of days and then we would do it again. Yeah. So it was mainly ecstasy and cocaine in the early years at the warehouse. But man, I'll be honest with you, there's no way I would be able to put together a timeline, but it gradually progressed throughout those 20 years. There was time where I was smoking a lot of PCP. There's a time where, hallucinogens were always kind of a thing, mushrooms and acid. And then I got introduced to opioids. I think opioids was around like 2007, 8. It started with like Percocet, 5s, 10s, and then the 15s, and eventually these, and
Mm-hmm.
that things started to get dark around that time.
Okay. How were you
Yes,
taking those? Were you snorting them and taking them orally or what?
yeah. Ever since I tried cocaine, I became not just like addicted. I just really enjoyed sniffing things.
Mm-hmm.
I sniffed anything I could. My wife used to my wife has some physical illnesses, right? And she was getting Ambien prescription for a very long time. And I used to sniff them. And the Ambien is like, it's similar to Xanax in the sense that it's not water soluble, right? So it's actually more beneficial. You'll feel it more. It'll work more if you just swallow it, right? Sniffing it, you're only getting the pill that actually drips down your throat into your stomach, right? So you might as well just take it. But I sniffed it anyway, just because I just like doing that.
Yeah. And that's a benzodiazepine too, right?
I actually am not sure what that's classified as,
I think it
but it's
is.
very similar.
Um,
Have done both. It's similar.
yeah. Were you taking other benzos like Xanax and stuff like that on top of perks and stuff?
No, Xanax were never really my thing. I don't know. I never really got high off of Xanax, honestly. It was either I didn't feel anything or it knocked me out. I didn't know how to I had people in my close circle who took a lot of bars and things like that. And I was, you know, dibbling and dabbling and selling them. And I did sniff them before, but I never really it was never really something that I did. Yeah, the Ambien was just kind of there, and it
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, it's time to go to bed. Like this is just another opportunity to sniff something, Sounds strange, but that is definitely how I lived my life.
Were there any times where you think you may have gotten close to overdosing or did overdose?
No, the opioids was like, so this was before like fentanyl, obviously. Not that fentanyl didn't exist, but it wasn't the epidemic it is today. People were still buying heroin or, what we call dope, and it was actually dope.
Black tar and stuff?
Yeah, well, mainly like the wax bags, just like the powder. But I never did that. Um, I would just buy Percocet from like people that I knew. It was a lot of like older people that were like going to the doctor and getting scripts, and then they would just sell them every month. But because I was doing so many other drugs as well, I would only buy like, okay, you get your script on the 27th of every month. Then I would come over on the 27th and I'd buy 10, 15, whatever. I could swing that day. And then I had a few people different times a month, but I would physically go through withdrawal multiple times a month, but I never really did a quantity where I think I would have overdosed.
What were you drinking at all during these times, or was that just kind of nothing that became a huge problem on top of the drugs? It was more the
Yeah,
drug.
man, I tell you, alcohol was a major, major problem of mine. I would gladly tell you that I was an alcoholic, almost like a badge of honor, you know? And drinking was always, I would say, probably as soon as I moved out of my mother's house at like 17. And at that point, you know, and I'm working, um, at that point, the alcohol was an everyday thing. And it remained like that my whole life. Alcohol was, it's crazy. When I got into recovery, I went to rehab because I wanted to stop doing meth, which is a whole thing we haven't gotten to yet to kind of jump forward. But I didn't realize I needed to stop drinking, you know? It was
Mhm.
about, let me just stop doing this one substance so I can continue to do what I've been doing my whole life, you know?
Okay. So how did you ever go through alcohol withdrawal?
No, man, I don't know that there was ever a day when I didn't drink alcohol. I
So you
really
never.
don't. I don't.
Yeah.
It was always large quantities of beer and then, you know, bottles of liquor consistently.
Hmm. Yeah, like wake up in the morning, you had no problem drinking one.
No, not at all. I didn't really drink before work. So I drove a forklift, you know, a 9,000 pound forklift flying through the warehouse at 15, 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
I didn't drink, but I always had something in my pocket, you know? I-
Hmm.
It's like, oh, drinking is dangerous, but yet I'm sniffing opioids and nodding out. Uh, I had a buddy of mine that worked with me at the warehouse for 20 years. And towards the end, I remember I sniffed the Opana on my lunch break. And I went back in and I was like nodding out. And he was just disgusted with me, you know? And I held a resentment against him a long time for that until you know, I'm a member of a 12-step fellowship and I kind of went through my steps and did my inventory. But yeah, it's the blindness that you're under, the rationalizing and the normalizing that you do is just insane, man. To look back
Yeah.
on it.
Thinking it's all normal and okay at the time. I mean, when I would be making it a point to go to the mini mart on my lunch break and buy exact amount of alcohol and chug that as fast as possible before going back to work. And I was be like, I thought it was normal. And then looking back at it, I'm like, man, that is insanity.
Yeah, I actually thought if you didn't do that, you were like less of a man. That's like the
Yeah.
distortion, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So carry me, you progressed into, you said eventually, what age did you try meth and what happened there?
So again, timelines are a real issue for me, but I'm gonna say around like 2014, meth became like a much bigger thing in my area, or at least I became more aware of people doing a lot of crystal, and I got introduced to it, right? You know, again, not I made a conscious decision to continue to buy meth, but a buddy of mine, we used to give each other lines at work, right? And he asked me if I wanted a line one morning, and I said, yeah. We went in the bathroom and we used to go like into the stalls next to each other and we would like fold it up in a bill and pass it under the stall to each other. And he passed it to me and I opened it and it's just white powder and I sniffed it and I immediately knew that it wasn't cocaine. Right.
Hmm.
And I was upset with him and I confronted him and he was like, my fault. I thought you knew. And he was like, just watch, just watch. And I used to work 2 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Right. And I did that line at 3 in the morning and I didn't need to do another line the entire day. I didn't think about doing another line the entire day. I went home. I didn't sleep that night. Went back to work the next morning, not tired. And I just went up to him like, yo, that was crazy. And he was like, yeah, you think that's crazy? He was like, this quarter gram is $20. It'll last you all week.
Jeez.
And, you know, at that time, cocaine paying, almost $200 for an 8 ball, and it's not even really cocaine anymore, you know?
Hmm. You have to do a line every half hour.
Yeah, and it's mainly cut, and it's not really like how it used to be. These are all the things I'm telling myself, right? So then I started getting a quarter gram, and it did. It lasted me a long time, but that progresses quick. It's a whole nother animal, man.
Yeah.
And I was sniffing it, and it was like, it went from a quarter gram to a gram to, the last year or two, I was probably doing an 8 ball a day. And I was rationalizing that by saying, oh, this 8 ball is only $80, $100, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I accidentally did meth the one and only time, but that was because I thought it was cocaine. And I remember it kept me up for 3 days. And I was just like, all right, I didn't like it enough to want to do it again. I had opportunities to, but I just knew that it was going to become a thing if I did it again. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's how I found out. It just burnt. And then the exact same response from the people with me. They're like, sorry, we thought you knew. And I was just like, no, this burnt like heck. And I feel weird. So, yeah.
Yeah. It feels like you got punched in the nose, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like my eyes were watering and stuff. And I was just like, what the heck? So yeah, no, I get it. So it was a pretty quick progression from a quarter gram evolving into like an 8 ball a day over the course of
Yeah.
months and years.
Um, you know, my wife was aware of like my drug use and stuff. I really struggled with like the thought of wanting to get clean. It's hard to see the problems, right? When all you're looking at is like, well, I've always had a job. I've been at this job for 15 plus years, right? Like I've never been unemployed. We've always had a house, our daughter is taken care of, and you just rationalize things like that. My wife, however, there was a point in time where I was selling meth, and her response was like, I could see, feel, and hear the stigma surrounding it.
Hmm.
So I never told her that it was meth, she always thought it was cocaine until I got into recovery and, came clean with her. But, I would just get the crystal and I would crush it all down. I'd take the whole ball game and crush it all up in the white powder and put it back in the bag. And she just thought that's what it was. But
Crazy. Yeah. So how was your when you were primarily using meth, you probably weren't using a lot of other drugs?
nah, I mean, alcohol and weed were still a daily thing, but yeah, pretty much all other drugs and all other interests go out the window, you
Yeah.
know?
That's what I've heard. And how were you like as you progressed into that, and were any like what were like side effects of it, like lack of sleep? Was these things starting to like affect your relationships with your wife and
Yeah.
your
The
family?
biggest, I'm sure she would have a different response than me, but a lot of the arguments and the disagreements were about the manipulation and the lying and the financial, right? It's like
Yeah.
I'm manipulating the system. She doesn't care that I go buy drugs and get high if things are taken care of.
Yeah.
But at the rate that I'm spending, she would foresee that it's going to cause a problem in the future. So because of that, I would have to do some manipulation and say my check was less than it was so I could spend the extra, or say I paid something when I didn't so that I could spend it. And a lot of that caused a lot of problems. And then of course there's lack of sleep. Um,
Yeah.
there were nights that I'd be up, I had to be at work at 2 a.m. and I'd be in the living room, and she would go to bed early. She'd wake up and come out at 11, 12 o'clock at night. Like, you got to be to work in a couple hours. You better get in here. And then I would go in the bed and I would just lay there and just
Yeah.
pretend like I was asleep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that affects
That's,
your relationship too, not going to bed together and just not having that quality time.
yeah.
And then you're just kind of doing your own thing because it's all you can think about. It's like, I'm awake, I'm doing this. And
Yeah.
meth definitely keeps people busy and occupied. But like, when did it start to really negative effect where you felt like you had to quit? Like, where did that kind of start hitting rock bottom?
Again, another gradual progression where I didn't understand powerlessness. You know, they talk a lot about that in the programs. But I was always under the impression that I can just stop if I want it bad enough, And then when you tell yourself you're going to stop and you go pick up, then it's like, oh, I changed my mind. You don't really see it as powerless, right? But around 2019, well, my younger brother passed away in 2017.
Sorry.
He was 4 years into recovery at that point. And he relapsed. We didn't know. And when he passed away, we went to me and my older brother went to his house to check on him, and he had relapsed and passed away. And when that happened, it went from like, okay, I need to do this, to like maintain, to like ramped up to like, I'm going to do this until whatever happens. It was almost like a self-destruction, intentional self-destruction, rather than a subconscious self-destruction. So that was 2017. By 2019, I was going in and out of like mental health facilities. I knew that I was bipolar at that time. So I would go into these, they're like short stay, like 7-day mental health facilities in my area. And I would go in there and tell them like I'm severely depressed and I was struggling with going to work. And I was, my functioning had really came to an end at that point. But I wasn't telling them I was getting high. I wasn't even honest about drinking. And then I was going in and out, they would adjust my medication. I would start to feel better. Then I would go home and back and forth. And then I went in 2021, January of 21, and the depression was so bad, man. When I think back on it, it's hard for me to even understand myself, when I experienced it. But I was in bed all the time. And it's crazy. I was still doing the drugs. I was still drinking from my bed.
Jeez.
And I remember I would have to go to the bathroom, and the bathroom is directly across the hall from my bedroom. And I would just hold it until I could no longer hold it. It was just that much work for me to get up and go to the bathroom. I wasn't eating. All I thought about all day long was death.
Yeah.
So I went in there in January of 21, and there was a woman who worked there. She was a tech, and she knew me because I had been in there so often. And I remember I was just sitting in the day room, and I had my hands in my head, and my head in my hands, and I was just not present, And I remained like that for hours. And finally she came to me and was like, what's going on? This isn't the person that I know. Do you want to talk? And, we went into this little side office, and she just was basically telling me like, be honest with me, what's going on. And, today I choose to believe that was God moment, a God intervention,
Yeah.
That woman didn't say anything that 100 million other people haven't said to me before, right? A lot of people would refer to that as like rock bottom, right? Like you hit rock bottom and you were ready for a change. I don't know, man. God worked in mysterious ways that day. I just told her like, at that point it was like, well, yes, I do drugs, and I definitely need to stop doing drugs. I honestly didn't think drinking was a problem. I didn't think smoking weed was a problem. I didn't even think the opioids were a problem, right? It was like, I just got to stop doing this meth because it's making me severely depressed.
Yeah.
And she asked me to go into a 30-day program. I had all the normal excuses, which I'm sure everyone that's been on here has told
Work,
you.
my family, all that
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yep. It was exactly that, And the irony is I wasn't going to work, I already wasn't going to work. I already wasn't interacting and spending time with my family, But I spoke to my wife, and I told her I would sleep on it, and I'd let her know. And my wife was like, you need to do this. So I committed, and I went. And as the fog started to lift, and as I started to realize that again, it has to have been God for me, man. Like, there's no way that I could repeat the same cycle for 30 years. And then now all of a sudden, I'm able to step back and say, if I don't get honest, if I don't try something different, I'm going to repeat that cycle, you know? And as you're repeating the cycle, it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. The depression didn't get better. It got worse. And I was at a point where if the depression were to progress anymore, I was going to, take my life or lose my life in some way.
Yeah. Very passively suicidal and stuff. That's every
Yeah.
time I relapsed or kept getting into that cycle, the cycle kept getting darker and darker, and the ways I imagined dying just got more vivid. And I was just like, okay. And I had like a God type moment when I was at the hospital the final time, and this lady came in who's a nun who usually reads their rights to people that are about to pass away. And she came in and recognized my name on the computer from childhood. Apparently, I went to this Catholic school when I was younger for a couple of years. And she recognized my name after all those years, like 30 years, and said, just kind of talked to me and came and prayed with me every day. And I'm not that religious at the time. And I just kind of like, it stuck with me. And she's just like, do you want to be here again? Or do you want to, you know, reach your potential? And I was kind of like, all right, I'll go to treatment. So I did, and I haven't looked back. But yeah, sometimes those moments are just, you need that intervention after getting into a darker and darker place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went into treatment on February 20th?
No. So I was, I said January, but I guess it was February. February 26th is like the day that I went into the mental health facility, because the last day I used was the 25th. And then I woke up on the 26th and went into the mental health facility, and then I did a bed to bed. So yeah, it was a slow awakening of like, for me, the alcohol was like the first big hurdle, right? It's like, okay, it started off as I can't do meth, but then it was like, well, I probably shouldn't do any hard drugs, you know? But then something dawned on me, man. Like, every time I drink, which is every day, right? The first thing I want to do is get high. They went hand in hand. I would go to the bar after work with my coworkers, and there were the guys who would go and have a couple drinks and then say they got to go home to their family. And that confused me, right?
Yeah.
And then slowly people would start leaving. But the ones who remained were the people who were waiting for all the non-drug users to leave so that we could call the guy and go get high, right? So it was like, well, if I drink, I'm going to get high. So I probably can't drink. And then the hardest decision was like marijuana, where it's like, marijuana never really caused me any direct harm.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a decision of, the pain. Well, the pain was so severe for me that I'm not taking any chances.
Yeah.
And my rationalization, or the way that I came to that decision rather, was like, if I am able to successfully smoke weed, right, it's only a matter of time before I convince myself that I can also successfully just have a beer, right? And then the worst case scenario is that I successfully have a beer and it doesn't go any further that day, because then the next time it's just a little bit more. And it might take a month, it might take a year, but eventually I want to convince myself that I don't have a problem. And that is a nightmare scenario for me.
Yeah. That's how
You
it
know,
starts. It's just those thinking you can handle it now, or thinking you've been in recovery long enough, you start to, rest on your laurels, like they say in the rooms. It's a real thing. And that happened to me when I did 90 and 90 one time, the last time before my last relapse. But I just totally thought that I had it figured out after 90 days, and that I was like, okay, I've got the education now. I've talked to these other people. I can handle having a drink. And that turned into hell for another 2.5 months. Then I went to treatment, and here I am 16 months later. But it's very progressive how it just starts to lie to you and get a hold of your brain.
yeah.
So what were your first, did you spend, how much time did you spend at those beds in the mental health? And like, when did you start to feel clarity and start to feel better? And did you start to come up with new life plans and all that?
I was never a plan, I never thought past today, you know? I remember being in high school and people thinking, even in middle school, people were thinking about what high schools they wanted to go to, which high schools had sports teams that they wanted to play for, which high schools. I never thought about any of that, you know? My employment was who will hire me in my area that pays me more than the previous one. It was
Yeah.
never planning for the future. No, I, early recovery was like that as well. I just taking it 1 minute at a time, man, which is
Which is good
honestly
in
a
recovery.
skill for me. Yeah, it is a skill for me. Yeah, it was just let me just try to figure this out, man. And I was, because of the pain that I felt, I became open. I started taking suggestions, and most of the time, if I allowed myself, my logic would talk me out of it, but I just refused to let that happen. You know,
Yeah.
I spoke a lot about God today, and that is so far from who I have been my whole life.
Yeah. It's
It
amazing.
wasn't something that I was willing to even look at because, even with all that I've been through in my life, I try to explain this to people I work with. Like, we can be victims, but we don't have to look at things through a victim mindset. And
So true.
that's how I looked at God, through a victim mindset. What about me? What about all the things I've been through? He doesn't give a shit about me. Me, 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 me. You know? Um,
You feel like in recovery, you've been able to address a lot of those things that have happened to you?
yeah, one of the greatest gifts of recovery for me is developing a desire to want to grow. I talked about how I never wanted to do anything. I never thought I needed to change. I never thought I needed to learn anything or have goals. I never had any goals. Today I desire to be better every day. And I've always heard that, a lot of people say that, but I really feel it today. So I've done, the trauma therapy, and I work closely with my sponsor, and, um, I ended up leaving the warehouse in 2022 um to get into like the addiction mental health field. I became a certified peer, and then I started, the guy who told me about the peer position was actually my drug and alcohol counselor, and he kind of inspired me to be like, I'm gonna, he helps a lot of people. He helped me tremendously. So I started working towards my CADC, which is my goal at this point. But, maybe the beginning of the year, I was promoted from peer to substance abuse counselor. So, um, I found purpose in life, man. I really have. And it's so important to me.
Awesome. So yeah, so you were inspired by your own addiction counselor to kind of get into where you're at now, and then so now you're helping others, and also you started a clothing brand.
Yeah. That was just kind of born out of, I really owe all this to the 12 steps, man. 12 steps really taught me how important it is to carry the message forward. And out of carrying the message forward, my purpose in life was born. And that's how the clothing line started. It was like, you know, what can I do to like spread the message? And, I created like 2 or 3 shirt designs. I invested some money in some printing equipment, and it just kind of grew from there, you know? Um,
Awesome.
yeah,
It's
I
cool.
do like all the design work and stuff myself. And
And it's called Fourth
so,
Dimension Apparel. What's the concept behind it? What is it about?
yeah, Fourth Dimension Apparel, the name is pulled from the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill Wilson was talking about, he was rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence. We have a better understanding now of what the fourth dimension is, time. But back then he was talking about like a spiritual connection. He was talking about, the 3 dimension is like what we can see and touch and feel, and the 4th dimension is what we can't. So that's where the name was pulled from. And then our tagline is spark conversations that ignite change. And I just do all the design work trying to get somebody to ask me like, "Yo, what is that shirt about? What does that mean?"
Yep. Like a
Anything
good
to,
rebirth shirt you're wearing. I was going to ask about it.
yeah, this is one of the early designs. It's just kind of like, yo, any opportunity to start a discussion, to work, to chip away at this stigma of addiction, lower that shame and that guilt. That is a huge part of why people don't get help, right? It's like they feel like they're going to be less than, and I know different today.
Exactly. So you're trying to use the brand as a way of expressing your thoughts on ending the stigma of addiction and mental illness.
Yeah, man, it's just about getting conversations started. That's all. That's really it. And I donate a portion of all sales to local recovery organizations here in Delaware. So, the most of the money is just reinvested back into creating more designs and buying more materials and donating to recovery organizations.
It's amazing.
It's not something that I want to retire with. It's just something that I want to, it's my contribution to the cause, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you guys do printing for other companies too, or people doing events and stuff like that, or
Yeah. So I started like a sister company, which is just like a custom printing company. Um, I don't really advertise it like that. It's a lot of um friends and family and people from the communities that I interact with. But yeah, I have the ability to print. It's not screen printing, so it's direct to garment and direct to film. So I'm able to do like full image pictures. So I do like memorial shirts, family barbecues, family reunions. Small businesses. I have a couple small businesses that support me a lot and um ask me to do stuff for them. So yeah,
awesome.
that's just like a side hustle kind of thing where if you have the machine and you're going to it costs money to fire it up, right? So I just want to you know get the most use out of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good. Are you a lot of your relationships? Are you building, working with other people in recovery, talking to? You communicate with the recovery centers quite a bit since you're donating to them and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
So my main communication with like the recovery community is because I'm actively engaged in that. There's a couple organizations where they have a couple events a year. I'm always at those events. I do vendor tables at events. I still do service commitments with my home group and go into local rehabs and detoxes and, you know, talk about the 12 steps. And then, my job, I work inside of a prison, in my local prison in a recovery program. So, I'm just talking with the inmates about what I've learned to sustain long-term recovery.
Awesome.
I spend most of my day. It's very important to me, not only on like a personal level, but like on a recovery level.
Yeah.
You know, I have to
Yep.
talk about this all day because if I don't, I'll forget why it's so important to me.
So true. It's so true. I mean, I get to my meeting 5 days a week. Sometimes I make it to 6, but I mean, I feel weird if I'm not in there talking about it. Thankfully, I've developed friendships on not even just social media, but outside, the rooms and all that, to people that's like we're naturally talking recovery all the time too. So it's amazing.
Yeah, it's like you put on you go from I went from a victim lens, right? Where it's like everything in life is about me. How did it affect me? How did it. And now I look at everything through a sobriety lens, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
if something happens, the first thing I'm thinking about is like, how is this going to affect my sobriety? How is this going to affect my recovery, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. It's very important for me.
Good. And how have your other relationships at home gotten, like with your wife and everything? Is everything getting so much better in the last almost 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've really learned how to be less affected by life. Addiction is one of them things where it's like that was our skill, right? That was our solution. That was like something bad happened, drinking and using was like our answer. Something good happened, drinking and using was our answer. Today, I am less, I have less of those peaks and valleys. I'm able to remain calm and I don't want to say unaffected, but not negatively affected by life. Lifing was very hard for me for many, many decades. Today I'm a much more peaceful person. And that makes relationships a lot easier, you know?
Yeah. You wake up happy to wake up in the morning, happy to take on your day, getting good sleep again, and just I'm sure your relationship with your wife got closer because of all of this, and with your daughter as well. And that's amazing. So, just thinking about where we were towards that rock bottom moment, where it was just like your face in your hands and me in my hospital, it's just, you think what's better than death right now, and then now look at the 180 that we took, just because of giving ourselves a chance, so it's pretty incredible what you're doing, so it's awesome.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to been able to hear a lot of your story today, and it sounds like life is so much better now, and you got the clothing brand, and it sounds like ending the stigma of addiction and mental illness is something we all need right now too, because there is a stigma. So the more people we have outspoken about it, the better, I think. So that's good.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to my listeners here right now that are sober curious or going through any issues mental illness wise? What would your advice be for them based on your experience?
I think again, to kind of tie in like the stigma thing, right? It's like we're so worried about being judged, right? We're so worried about other people's opinions of our story, right? But, one of the most important things my sponsor told me is what other people think of you is none of your business, And I have to remind myself of that every day, right? Because it's natural for me to be in my head thinking, what is this guy thinking about what I'm saying,
Exactly. Yeah.
But I can't do that. So if you're struggling, don't worry about being less than, but
Mhm.
on a deeper level, right? We are not less than, right? We have an illness, an allergy, a disease, whatever you want to call it. I don't think the label is as important as understanding that we are just human. Every human is flawed, Another thing that my sponsor always says is we are perfectly imperfect. Not just me, not just you, everyone. We're all imperfect. So, if we don't learn to ask for help and learn to take suggestions, we'll never do better. Again, it goes back to what I consider my greatest gift of recovery is like learning to do better.
Yeah.
And
Do the next right thing.
9% of the time, that doesn't come from me, That doing better is, I learned that from other people.
Yeah. Same.
So, get connected, man. Get honest. It all starts with honesty with yourself.
Yeah.
One of the things I always ask the inmates that I work with, what will you lose, right? What if you get into recovery and you get connected to people in recovery and you abstain from drugs and alcohol? What will you lose?
So
I'll
true.
tell you what, man, you're not going to lose the ability to enjoy life. That's the biggest misconception. I enjoy life today more than I've ever enjoyed life,
Yeah. Same.
So
True. Never hear about people's lives getting worse from quitting.
I know not one person in recovery who says it was a mistake.
Yeah, exactly.
Every one of them will tell you it was the best decision of their lives. So, you know, ask yourself that. If you're curious about it, ask yourself, what are you giving up? The only thing you could say is drugs and alcohol, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's it, man.
Yeah. You're giving up all that money spent, maybe relationships with dealers or whatever, but I mean, none of that matters. Yeah. So, no, I appreciate that. That is amazing advice. So I'm really grateful for you being on the show and reaching out and being on the show and talking about everything and being vulnerable. So it means a lot to me.
Of course, man. I appreciate you having me on, and I respect what you do, man. This is a great platform.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Rock Bottom with Ryan. No bullshit, just recovery.